My past was not a memory, it was a crime scene, a chaotic, cordoned off area of my life that I had long since abandoned. The evidence of my failures was everywhere: the phantom weight of credit card debt, the lingering shame of a spectacularly messy divorce, and the ghost of a crushing depression that had swallowed 2 years of my life whole. I was, by my own admission, a reclamation project. And Ethan was my brilliant, patient, dedicated architect. He found me in the rubble, and he promised to help me rebuild. It took me 3 years to realize he wasn't building me a new house. He was building a museum to my failures, with himself as the sole curator. Ethan was, by all external measures, a saint. When we met, I was a mess. I was working a dead-end job just to pay the bills, living in a tiny apartment that smelled of regret, and my confidence was shattered into a million pieces. He was stable. He was kind. He was a financial advisor, a man who built his life on order and foresight, everything I lacked. He listened to the long, sordid tale of my past, the impulsive decisions, the emotional turmoil, the ex-husband who had gaslit me into oblivion, and he didn't run. He held my hand, looked me in the eye, and said, "That's not who you are anymore, Maya. That's just what happened to you. We'll get you back on your feet." And he did. He helped me create a budget. He helped me consolidate my debt. He encouraged me to find a better job. He was my rock, my anchor in the storm of my own history. I clung to him with a gratitude that bordered on worship. He had saved me from myself. The problem with being saved, however, is that the savior often needs the victim to remain saved. My strength became a threat to his narrative. The control was insidious, disguised as unwavering care. It began with my finances. "Let me handle the bills, honey," he'd offered early on. "It'll take the stress off you, so you can focus on healing. We don't want you getting overwhelmed and falling back into old habits." It sounded so loving, so practical. So I gave him access to my accounts. Soon, he was questioning every purchase. A new dress. Is that really a need right now, Maya? Remember how the debt crept up on you? A night out with my girlfriends. That bar is expensive. Maybe you girls could just come over here. I'll buy a bottle of wine. It's more responsible. My financial freedom was replaced by an allowance, doled out by my gentle, caring warden. Then came the friends. He called them my past life friends, the ones who had been there through the divorce and the depression. He disapproved of them, subtly at first. My best friend Lisa was a little too wild. My friend Mark, who was like a brother to me, was a bad influence. Ethan's reasoning was always wrapped in the language of protection. "I just worry, Maya," he'd say, his voice soft with concern. "You're so susceptible to suggestion when you're feeling down." Those friends were part of your old life, the life that made you so unhappy. Maybe a clean break is what you need to truly move forward. He made me believe he was protecting my fragile recovery, but in reality, he was severing my support system. Lisa and Mark were the only two people who remembered the strong, vibrant Maya from before the fall. They were a link to an identity he couldn't control. So he systematically pushed them away, manufacturing small disagreements, expressing his discomfort with their presence until it was just easier not to see them. My world shrank until it contained only him. It felt safe. It felt secure. It was a cage lined with velvet. The past was a ghost he invited to dinner every night. It was in the way he'd look at me when I was tired. "Are you feeling that old sadness creeping back in?" It was in his reaction to any new idea I had. "Let's think this through carefully, babe. We have to be more deliberate than other people because of your history with impulsivity." He appointed himself the guardian of my past, the gatekeeper of my future. He held my history over me like a shield, protecting me from the world, but also blocking my path forward. I had confessed my deepest shamus to him, and he had turned them into a rule book for my life. I lived inside that rule book for years. I believed I was broken. I believed my judgment was inherently flawed. I believed I needed his steady hand to navigate the world. I was so grateful for his stability that I didn't recognize it as stagnation. My life was neat, orderly, and small. It was a life built in opposition to my past mistakes rather than in pursuit of a genuine future. I wasn't living, I was simply not failing. The first brick in my prison wall came loose the day I was offered a promotion. I worked as a project coordinator for a marketing firm. I was good at my job, organized, efficient skills. I had honed in a desperate attempt to be the opposite of my chaotic former self. My boss, a sharp, intuitive woman named Mrs. Gable, called me into her office. She told me the head of the creative department was leaving, and she wanted me to take the position. It was a shock, a terrifying, exhilarating shock. Me? Head of a department? It was a creative role, a leadership role. It was everything I had told myself I couldn't be: decisive, innovative, in charge. It was a direct challenge to the narrative Ethan had so carefully constructed for me. "I know it's a big step up, Maya," Mrs. Gable said, her eyes kind but assessing, "but I've watched you for 2 years. You have a great eye and you know how to get things done. You're organized, but you're not rigid. I think you're ready." I went home in a daze, clutching the offer like a winning lottery ticket. A part of me, the old Maya, was screaming with joy, but another part, the Ethan-trained Maya, was trembling with fear. I was terrified of what he would say. I told him over dinner, my voice shaking slightly. Mrs. Gable offered me the department head position today. I expected surprise, maybe even a flicker of pride. Instead, his face clouded, over with that familiar deep concern. He put his fork down and reached across the table for my hand. His grip was tight. "Oh, honey, wow." He shook his head slowly. "That's a lot of pressure." "I know," I said, my excitement already deflating. "But she thinks I can do it." "Of course she does," he said smoothly. "She sees how capable you are. But does she know what you've been through? Does she understand the kind of stress that triggers your episodes?" The word hung in the air between us. Episodes. He made my past depression sound like a chronic, incurable disease. "Ethan, that was years ago," I said weakly. "And we've worked so hard to keep you stable since then," he countered, his voice a soothing balm of poison. "This kind of role, managing people, tight deadlines, creative pressure. It's the exact cocktail that led to your breakdown before. I can't stand the thought of you going back to that dark place. It would kill me to see you like that again." He wasn't talking about my well-being. He was talking about his experience of my suffering. He was centering his own potential pain to manipulate my decision. He held my past against, not as a cautionary tale, but as a life sentence. That night, I told Mrs. Gable I needed time to think about the offer. Ethan praised me for my sensible decision. He told me he was proud of me for not being impulsive. I felt sick. The cracks were forming. A few days later, I was cleaning out an old desk drawer and found a box of photos from college. I saw pictures of myself with Lisa and Mark, laughing, covered in paint, full of a life and light I hadn't felt in years. In those photos, I wasn't fragile. I was fearless. It felt like looking at a stranger. On an impulse, I couldn't explain. I found Lisa on social media and sent her a message. "Hey, it's been too long. I was thinking about you." She replied almost instantly, "Maya, oh my God. I've missed you. How are you?" We agreed to meet for coffee the next day, a small act of rebellion that felt like treason. Seeing her was like coming home to a country I'd forgotten I was from. She looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "You seem quiet." I told her about the promotion, about my hesitation. I repeated Ethan's concerns, his carefully crafted arguments about stress and my fragile past. I expected her to nod and agree. Instead, she threw her head back and laughed. It was a loud, sharp sound that startled me. Fragile? She said, wiping a tear from her eye. Mia, are you kidding me? I was there. I saw you crawl your way out of hell after your ex-husband tried to destroy you. I saw you work 2 jobs to pay off debt he ran up. I saw you get out of bed every single day when just breathing felt impossible. Fragile is the last word I would ever use to describe you. You are a goddamn survivor. Her words hit me with the force of a physical blow. For years, Ethan had defined my past as a story of failure and fragility. Lisa, in one single glorious minute, had reframed it as a story of strength and survival. The 2 narratives were utterly incompatible. One of them had to be a lie. The final, definitive moment came that weekend. I was supposed to be working on a presentation for Ethan, helping him with a pro bono project for a local charity. He was on the phone with his mother in the other room. I thought the door was closed, but it was slightly ajar. I heard my name. Yeah, Maya's doing really well, he said. His tone was strange, flat. Her boss offered her a big promotion. Head of a department. It's a lot. Honestly, I think it's a mistake. She's not ready for that kind of pressure. There was a pause. Of course she's leaning on me. She'd be lost without my guidance. I have to keep a close eye on her, make sure she doesn't get, like before, it's a heavy burden, but /well. Someone has to do it, a heavy burden. She'd be lost without my guidance. It wasn't concern, it was ego, it was pride. He didn't see me as a partner to be celebrated. He saw me as a project to be managed. A damsel in perpetual distress that proved his strength and his necessity. My healing wasn't a shared victory. It was a threat to his job description. He wasn't my savior. He was my gatekeeper. And he had no intention of ever letting me leave the prison of my past because he had made it his castle. I stood in the hallway, my blood running cold. In that instant, every caring comment, every protective gesture, every sensible piece of advice rearranged itself into a new, hideous pattern. It was a pattern of control designed to keep me small, to keep me dependent, to keep me grateful. He hadn't helped me rebuild my life. He had put my old life in a display case and charged me admission every single day. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding a silent, furious rhythm. I went back to the living room and sat on the couch, staring at the blank television screen. When he came out of the room, he smiled his gentle, loving smile. Hey, you, ready to get to work on this presentation? I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw him for the first time, not the saint, not the savior, just a man who was so afraid of being unnecessary that he had to clip my wings to keep me on the ground. No, I said, my voice eerily calm. I'm not going to work on that presentation. His smile faltered. Oh, are you not feeling well? Is the sadness coming back? His go-to weapon. And for the first time, it had no effect. It was a bullet hitting bulletproof glass. No, Ethan, I said, standing up. The sadness isn't coming back. In fact, I don't think I've ever felt this clear in my entire life. That week, I started to write my new future. The first sentence was an email to Mrs. Gable. Dear Mrs. Gable, thank you for your patience. I would be honored to accept the position as head of the creative department. Hitting send felt like a declaration of independence. The second sentence was a phone call to a real estate agent. I found a small apartment on the other side of town, a place that had no history, no ghosts, a place that was just for me. I opened a new bank account in my name only. I moved my direct deposit there. Each action was a word, a phrase, a sentence in my new story. Ethan watched all of this with a growing sense of panic. His concern escalated into frantic attempts to reassert control. You're moving too fast, Maya. This is impulsive. This is exactly what you did before, he'd plead. No, I'd say, my voice steady. Before, I was running from something. Now, I'm running to something. The final confrontation happened the day I was packing my last box. He stood in the doorway of the bedroom, his face a mask of wounded anguish. This was his final stand. He drew his most powerful weapon. I can't believe you're doing this, he said, his voice cracking. After everything, after I'd pulled you out of the gutter, do you even remember what you were like? A drunken, sobbing mess who couldn't even pay her own rent. I saved you, and this is how you repay me? By throwing it all away on a whim. You're going to fail, Maya. You're going to crash and burn just like you always do, and this time, I won't be there to pick up the pieces. There it was, the ugliest, purest distillation of his control. A curse meant to drag me back down into the shame he so desperately needed me to feel. But I was already gone. I was standing on different ground. I turned to him, and I didn't feel anger or hate. I felt a strange, quiet pity. You're right, Ethan, I said softly. I remember exactly what I was like. I was at rock bottom. But my past is not a weapon, and you don't get to wield it anymore. My mistakes are not your trophies. I walked over to him and looked him directly in the eye. My past is the story of how I learned to survive. And you are not going to be the author of my future. That job is taken. I picked up the last box, brushed past him, and walked out the door. My new life is not a fairy tale. It's real. It's challenging and scary, and sometimes I am overwhelmed. But the feeling is different now. The stress is my own. The victories are my own. The future is a blank page, not a pre-written tragedy. Last night, I sat in my new apartment, the city lights twinkling outside my window. I opened a fresh journal to a clean, white page. I picked up a pen. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt an overwhelming sense of hope. I was finally ready to write. The first few months of my new life were a tightrope walk between exhilaration and terror. My new apartment was my sanctuary, a chaotic and colorful space that was gloriously, unapologetically mine. I bought a brilliant orange couch, a direct act of defiance against the muted, Ethan-approved palette I had lived in for so long. I reconnected with Lisa and Mark, and their easy laughter filled the rooms, chasing out the last of the ghosts. On the surface, I was free, but inside, in the quiet moments, I was at war with the man I had left behind. Because while Ethan was gone, his voice remained, a phantom echo in my head, whispering warnings of my own inadequacy. My new role as head of the creative department was the primary battleground. For the first time in years, there was no one to second-guess my decisions, no one to protect me from my own creative impulses. The freedom was dizzying, but the responsibility was immense. My first major project was a high-stakes rebranding campaign for a difficult legacy client. The pressure was enormous, and my team was looking to me for a vision. And in the face of that pressure, the old narrative, the one Ethan had so carefully written for me, came roaring back. I would sit in brainstorming meetings, and as my team threw out ideas, I would hear his voice, cool and logical. Are you sure that's a good idea, Maya? It seems a little impulsive. I would be on the verge of making a bold creative choice, and the whisper would come. The stress of leadership, that's what triggered your depression before. Are you sure you can handle this? I started to doubt myself at every turn. I would work late into the night, revising presentations over and over, terrified of making a mistake, terrified of proving him right. The fear of failure was a physical weight pressing down on my chest. One particularly brutal week, after a tense meeting with the client, I felt the old, familiar fog of depression beginning to creep in at the edges of my mind. I went home, exhausted and defeated, and considered calling my boss, Mrs. Gable, to tell her I had made a mistake, that I wasn't ready for the job. I was about to succumb to the prophecy. Then I saw the journal sitting on my new, messy desk. The journal where I had first started to write my own story. I picked it up, my hands shaking. I didn't write about my feelings. I read about the project. I broke down the client's feedback, not as a personal attack, but as a set of logistical problems. I listed my team's strengths. I mapped out a new strategy step by logical step. I wasn't being impulsive or emotional. I was being a leader. The act of writing, of imposing my own structure onto the chaos, cleared the fog. It wasn't about erasing my past. It was about using the lessons of my survival resilience, organization, a hard-won clarity as tools for my future. The next morning, I walked into the office with a new plan. I gathered my team. I didn't pretend to have all the answers. I laid out the problems, presented my strategy, and then I did something Ethan would never have understood. I asked for their help. I can't do this alone, I said. What do you all think? The ideas that flowed from that meeting were brilliant. The campaign we developed together was bold, innovative, and it worked. We landed. The client and the project was a resounding success. In the aftermath, I realized Ethan's fundamental error. He saw strength as solitary and unbending. I was discovering that true strength was collaborative, flexible, and found in trusting others, not just yourself. My personal life was also a process of reconstruction. I saw Lessa and Mark regularly. One evening, sitting in a loud, crowded restaurant with them, Lisa raised her glass. To the real Maya, she said, her eyes shining. It's so damn good to have you back. And I realized I wasn't just surviving. It was thriving. I was laughing from my gut again. I was making plans based on joy, not obligation. The past still had its echoes. I saw my ex-husband, the one before Ethan, at a farmer's market one Sunday. He was with his new wife and their child. For a moment, my stomach twisted with the memory of the pain, the betrayal, the public humiliation. But then it just faded. He was a stranger. A character from a book I had read so long ago I could barely remember the plot. His power over me was gone. I turned away and bought a bunch of sunflowers, their bright, unapologetic color a perfect match for my orange couch. One day, I received a text from an old mutual friend of Ethan's and mine. Hey, long time no see. I ran into Ethan. The other day, he asked about you. He seems pretty lost since you left. I read the text and I felt nothing. No guilt, no satisfaction, no anger. It was like hearing a weather report from a distant city. His emotional state was no longer tied to my own. It was his to manage. I texted back a simple, polite, I wish him well. And I meant it. His future was his story to write now, and it had nothing to do with mine. Last night, I was working late in my office, sketching out ideas for a new campaign. The city lights glittered outside my window. My office was a reflection of me organized, but with piles of inspiring books, colorful prints tacked to a corkboard, a lopsided pot from a pottery class one had recently started, a vibrant, messy testament to my own taste. I looked at the work my team had done, the awards we had won, the camaraderie we had built. I thought about the woman who had sat in a different office 3 years ago, terrified of her own shadow, convinced she was broken. She wasn't broken. She was dormant. She was a seed buried under the weight of someone else's expectations. Ethan hadn't been holding my past against me. He had been holding me in my past. He had tried to convince me that the preface to my story was the entire book. But he was wrong. I picked up my pen and started a new page in my journal. I didn't write about work or stress or the past. I wrote down an idea for a children's book, a silly, whimsical story about a girl who builds a ladder to the moon out of mismatched socks. It was a frivolous, inefficient, joyful idea. And it was mine. The future wasn't just a blank page anymore. It was a library full of endless possible stories. And I had a lifetime to write them all. Another year spun by, each day a quiet testament to the life I had built. The success of the rebranding campaign was not a fluke. It was the new standard. My department became known throughout the company as a hub of innovation and, more importantly, a place of psychological safety. I led my team not with the rigid top-down authority Ethan had modeled, but with a collaborative spirit born from the memory of my own silenced voice. My past, once my deepest shame, had become my leadership playbook, a guide on everything not to do. My apartment, with its loud orange couch and shelves of lopsided pottery, was a haven of my own making. The journal I had once used as a lifeline against gaslighting now sat on my nightstand, its pages filled not with frantic documentation, but with sketches, ideas, and snippets of dialogue for the silly children's book I was still tinkering with. It was no longer a shield. It was a playground. One crisp autumn afternoon, Mrs. Gable called me into her office. The years had softened her sharp edges, or perhaps my own newfound confidence simply allowed me to meet her gaze as an equal. "Maya," she began, getting straight to the point as always, "the board has approved a new initiative, a mentorship program. We want to partner with local art schools to find promising young women entering the creative fields, especially those who might not have the resources or connections to break through. We want to guide them, foster their talent." She paused, her eyes searching mine. "I want you to build it. And I want you to run it." The air left my lungs. A mentor. Me, the irony was so thick I could have choked. On it, all I could think of was Ethan, the self-proclaimed mentor who had nearly dismantled me. I thought of his guidance, which was just control. I thought of his support, which was just a means to keep me dependent. The word mentor itself felt tainted, dangerous. The old voice, Ethan's voice, whispered from a deep, forgotten corner of my mind. "You? A mentor? You're the one who needed saving. You'll break them, just like you were broken." I must have looked as terrified as I felt because Mrs. Gable's expression softened. "I know it's a lot to ask," she said. "And I'm not asking you because you're a good manager, Maya. I'm asking you because you're a good leader. You build people up. I've seen what you've done with your team. You've created a space where people aren't afraid to fail. And that is the rarest, most valuable thing in this entire industry." Her words were a balm. A space where people aren't afraid to fail. That was it. That was the key. The absolute antithesis of the life I had lived with. Ethan, where every action was measured against the threat of a past failure. This wasn't a request to become a new version of him. This was an opportunity to become his opposite. This was a chance to be the mentor I had so desperately needed. "Yes," I said, the word coming out stronger than I expected. "Yes, I'll do it." I spent the next 2 months designing the program with a fierce, almost obsessive passion. It became my new project, my new future to write. I built it on a foundation of 3 core principles. 1, your voice is your own. We will not teach you to sound like us. We will help you amplify the sound of you. 2, failure is data. It is not a verdict. We will experiment. We will make messes. We will fail spectacularly. And we will learn more from that than from any timid success. 3, your well-being is more important than your work. We will not celebrate burnout. We will celebrate balance, mental health, and a sustainable creative life. It was a manifesto against the culture that had almost destroyed me. Our first mentee was a young illustrator named Sarah. She was 22 with a portfolio, so full of raw, breathtaking talent it made my heart ache. And she was, in person, one of the most painfully insecure people I had ever met. She spoke in a whisper, her eyes constantly darting to the floor. She reminded me so much of myself at that age that it was difficult to breathe. She was my first test. In our third session, she presented her first project, a series of illustrations for a difficult client. The work was beautiful, technically flawless, but it was also timed. It was safe. I could feel the ghost of Ethan at my shoulder, whispering his old lines. It has no soul. It's weak. Deconstruct it. Show her the right way. I took a deep breath and pushed his voice away. Sarah, I said gently, leaning forward. Tell me about this piece right here. What were you feeling when you drew it? She blinked, startled. I was just trying to do what the client wanted. She stammered. I know, I said. But what did you want? Where's your voice in this? Show me the sketch you were most afraid to show the client. The one you thought was too weird or too bold. Hesitantly, she pulled a crumpled drawing from her sketchbook. It was a version of the same illustration, but it was completely different. It was dark and strange and possessed a wild, raw energy that the safe version lacked entirely. It was magnificent. That one, I said, my voice soft with awe. That's the one, that's the soul of the project. Our job now isn't to change it. It's to build a bridge between this incredible, brave idea and what the client needs. Let's figure out how. I watched as a flicker of something new sparked in Sarah's eyes. It was the dawning realization that her own instincts weren't something to be suppressed. They were something to be trusted. Over the next few weeks, I watched her transform. Her voice grew stronger. Her posture straightened. Her work became bolder, more confident. In our final session for that project, she presented a finished campaign that was not only brilliant, but was entirely, unapologetically hers. She had found her voice. And in helping her find it, I had solidified my own. Last night, we held the first showcase for the mentorship program. The gallery was filled with the incredible, vibrant work of a dozen young women. I stood in the back of the room, watching Sarah confidently explain her portfolio to a group of industry veterans. She was no longer whispering. She was radiant. Lisa and Mark found me, each of them wrapping me in a one-armed hug. Look what you built, Maya, Lisa said, her voice thick with emotion. I looked around the room, at the art, at the hopeful faces, at the buzz of a new generation finding its footing. My past was here in this room, not as a ghost or a source of shame, but as the invisible foundation upon which all of this was built. The pain had been real, but the purpose it had given me was now so much bigger than the pain itself. I hadn't just written a new future for myself. I was now, in some small way, helping to write a new future for others. And it was by far the most beautiful story I had ever been a part of.